Welcome to the Spring Risk Conference. We're excited to have several very good presentations and very timely presentations. We appreciate West Jordan City and Mayor Burton for offering their facilities.
I'm honored to be with you today. As a small business owner, I know things often don't go the way we think we will. We just keep going and moving forward with things. I have been an electrical contractor, and I focus on continuing education to electricians and contractors. And I often find myself talking about risk management to the electrical contractors, electricians I meet with. Well, I've left my regular business behind, and now I focus on public service. And I'm not afraid to share with you that I'm still focused on managing risk. I've invested both in earthquake and fire insurance on policies in my home. I call those my shake and bake policies. Today, I serve as the mayor for the third largest city in Salt Lake County. We are now over 115,000 residents in West Jordan, and we're bustling at the core. Managing a city of this size is no easy task. It's a big job, but I'm grateful for the opportunity I have to do this and work with accomplished individuals that do the heavy lifting and help us to perform as a city and respond to challenges. And as you can imagine, the last couple of weeks, we've had some fantastic challenges here in West Jordan. I've been working closely with our risk manager, Jared Smith, as we weather the beginnings of the COVID-19 crisis. We've had an earthquake. We had an accident recently on one of the main roads in West Jordan that cost a loss of natural gas of over $85,000. We've had some power outages and other day-to-day incidences that happen. Things happen in cities. To say that we're looking for an unpredictable environment is an understatement. Just 1 month ago, we had a relatively good stream of income. Unemployment was extremely low, and one of the biggest challenges we had in the city was trying to find qualified people to hire. Today is reversed. We're tightening our belt, and we're looking for opportunities to save every penny we can, and unemployment claims have hit the 2008 recession high. Though we come from different communities across the state and other areas, whose residents may represent different views in life, the experience you have will be critical to assisting your employees as we wade through the aftermath of what has come. This morning, I want to express my thanks to the fine folks at Olympia Insurance for putting together this event and preparing to help all of us in the future. With your help, we can make it all better. And to show you how much better I think we can make it, I put my special tie on today, which is a Band-Aid, because we are working together to make things better. There's never been a better time for the members of your field to join together as a community to continue your education and exchange ideas. You are the boots on the ground, and I'm so glad that you're here with us, even though we can't be here in person. I hope that when you have an opportunity to visit our great city, you will do so and see what we have to offer here in West Jordan. I want to thank you for the opportunity to welcome you. I hope you have a great day today and have an enjoyable session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Very timely remarks. With that, we're going to lead into the program. Our first speaker today is Steve Kane from the Provo River Water Users Association. Steve has a wealth of experience in risk management in many capacities over the years, and currently he serves as the facilities manager at Provo River, as well as overall risk responsibility. The Provo River Project provides water to most of the Wasatch Front through crucial infrastructure. And during his remarks today, he'll provide insight and background into the art of risk management and how we as risk managers can face some very difficult and trying times. One of the things that we would like to do as part of the risk conference is also invite your feedback. And if you would email your questions to questions.olyins.com. During the course of each presentation, we'll gather your questions, and then depending on the amount of time that we have, we'll field several questions at the end of each segment. And at the conclusion of the risk conference, we're also going to make available these slides, which will come to you by a link. So with that, we'll turn the time over to Steve Kane from the Provo River Water Users Association.
Good morning. It is great to be with everyone this morning. And as the mayor said, it's a little different to be doing this with us here and you there. These are all things that we're getting used to, but we believe that this technology is great. We're back to Provo River, which is a great place to be. And I'm assuming up there at Deer Creek right now that it is snowing like crazy. The association that I work for operates the Provo River Project for the Bureau of Reclamation, which covers about 5 counties. It collects water out of the Uintas from the Weber, Duchesne, and Provo systems, brings it down through Jordanelle and Deer Creek, and then delivers it to the Wasatch Front. We handle about 1/3 of all the water used in the Wasatch Front. We supply water to 1.75 million people. And so we cover a lot. We have a lot of infrastructure that we deal with, and I'm responsible for some of the operation and all the maintenance for that and all the relationships and risk management as well. We recently enclosed the Provo Reservoir Canal. Some of you know it as the Murdoch Canal, and that was a 21-mile-long canal enclosure project into a 10.5-foot diameter steel pipe, and it was all buried, and that was a $150 million project. And we went through 7 cities in that project, and 2 counties, had approximately 10,000 adjacent landowners. We replaced 530 utilities and 41 road crossings. And so it was a pretty comprehensive project. We did not do an owner control insurance program for this because it didn't have enough labor dollars to justify it. You have to have a certain number of labor dollars for an OSIP to work, and we did not do that. So those are the things I've been doing, and the things I've been involved with to kind of help understand where I'm coming from with regard to all this. We're currently looking at a project to replace the intake in Deer Creek, and Deer Creek Reservoir is 140 feet deep and holds 154,000 acre feet of water. The intake was put in service in 1941 and has exceeded its design life, and we're looking to replace that. And we have decided to do that project underwater, to do that project without taking the water out of Deer Creek. So we will use underwater construction techniques to do that work. And so you can imagine the risk issues that are going along with that. This has been really fun to consider this. We're in the early preliminary design phase. We'll do design next year, and construction will start in 2022. So that's kind of what we've been doing and where we're at. So what have I learned in all of this stuff? What can I impart that might be useful to you? And that's a good question. It'll be up to you to decide that. But I think one of the things is this old saying that goes around, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And that is very hard for us to do in this day and age when we have the ability to deal with and measure such little things. And it is very easy for us to get high-centered on details, high-centered on technology, which is what we're enjoying that today quite a bit, and to lose focus on what it is we're trying to do in any given situation. So my plea to you is to work on how you think about things. All these things I'm talking about are thinking things. And if you will think about how you think, especially as you go into relationships, situations, those kind of things, especially emergent or adverse situations, it's very hard to figure out what the main thing is and stay focused on that. If you will develop that skill, it will help you greatly. So let's go through this process. Risk comes from owning things or doing things. It doesn't actually come from anywhere else. Maybe it comes from knowing people. Well, that's risky by definition. Anybody that's in a family knows that. But for an organization, risk comes from owning things or doing things. And so that's where property insurance comes in, where liability insurance and all these other things come in, is because of these things. Anytime you undertake to do a thing or to acquire a new thing, you need to start thinking about what are the risks that are going to come with that activity or thing that we're buying. And if you'll start thinking that way, if you'll look at processing that way and having that mentality as you look to do things or change your behavior or whatever, that will help you immensely. And then that will help your organization immensely. I think you should focus on the fundamentals, and that's a really important thing. I think it's very important to take time to watch what's going on, watch what's happening, be an observer. The great thing about being a human is we have the capability to step outside of ourselves, stand back and think about what's happening and what we're observing, what we're doing, and watching things. So part of my message today is, as you're doing all these things, to slow down a little bit. And it doesn't take a lot, but slow down, try to step out of the urgency of things or things that sound important but may not really be, and watch what's happening a bit. Look around you, try to have better situational awareness. Listen. Now, this is a very hard thing for people to do. That's a very difficult skill to acquire, but listening is so important. I had some medical training in my younger life, and one of the great physicians there said, if you will look at and listen to your patient long enough, they will tell you everything that's wrong with them and how to fix it. I found that's great counsel. If you have people you're working with, if you'll just slow down and listen to them, they're generally associated with whatever's happening. They know whatever's happening, and they can tell you how to resolve things. This is particularly true if you're in the teenager business at your home. If you have teenagers, if you'll stop and listen to them a little bit, you can get a lot of information from them. And sometimes it takes a long time to accomplish that. I found that it's very important to be there, to be in person. Now, you'll notice earlier I said we had all these projects and we had no third-party claims. Well, things happened. It's not because things didn't happen, because they always do on projects that big. But in every case, every time something came up that I was aware of where there's any kind of a problem brewing, I would go and talk to the people and be there where the people were and would listen to them. And I would say, what's going on? What do you think? What's your view of things? And find out what's going on. Most of the time, people who would make a third-party claim against you simply want to be heard. Now, sometimes they do have damages, and that's what you have insurance for, is to help you take care of those things. But you avoid these really angry situations if you'll go and listen. And it doesn't really matter what your position is with these organizations. If your responsibility deals with people in any way and something's happening, if you'll go to the people, don't require them to come to you. If you'll go there and listen to them and be with them, you will learn a lot and you will solve a lot of problems. And most of them are very easy to solve. I found that it's very important for you to be honest and forthright with people, to be quick to say, you can be quick to say, I don't know. That's really important. Or if you do know, if it's your thing, to be quick to say, yeah, it's our thing. We'll take care of it. It's our thing that happened, and we will do that. And it's very important that it's part of being there, of being honest and open to people. And a big part of that is, if you don't know something, tell them that you don't know. Something I found that works as you enter into a situation with people is to say this to them. That is, I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the solution for this thing we're facing is, but I promise you I will stay with you. I will stay engaged until we figure this out, until we find an answer. And that commitment, and then following up on the commitment, that is actually being with them and keeping communication open and that kind of stuff, and going through the process, you will almost always come to a resolution that both of you understand, both parties understand, and you agree on it because you both had the same shared process of learning what the options were. If you'll do that, if you'll be open with them, they will come to the same conclusion you will, and the resolution will be easier. something's happened. There's going to be some payments made or some repairs made, or something's going to happen. Some consideration is going to occur, but you will both understand and agree what it is because of how it goes. Now, I'd like to show a little video and kind of playing this thing. And as we were starting up that big pipeline that I showed you earlier, we were doing the first filling on it. And I think it was March of 2012. And it's a big pipe. It takes 200 acre feet of water just to fill it up. And we were filling it up. And in Pleasant Grove, we found that one of the access hatches had not been tightened down all the way. It was on and there, but the connectors weren't torqued down. And it wasn't clear whether or not it was our contractor who was supposed to be doing it. They were supposed to be doing the testing, but we had been going through and checking some of them. We don't know if we missed that one or whoever, but between the contractor and us, we missed that particular manway access. And as the pipe began to fill up and pressurize, that access gave way. And it's a 36-inch opening, so a lot of water could come out of that. And the result is what you see here.
Thanks for being with us tonight. It's been a crazy day for a Pleasant Grove neighborhood. A canal flooded, turning landscaping into waterfalls and basements into pools.
News specialist Andrew Wittenberg is live on the scene looking into the damage and what it could cost homeowners. Andrew?
Yeah, David Deeney, good evening to you. It's dark now, so we can't see a lot of the damage, but think about this. Water was rushing through a pipe this size, 10.5 feet wide, completely full, 18,000 gallons a minute for nearly an hour, up out of the ground and into people's homes. The path of the rushing water could best be seen from the air in Pleasant Grove. The manhole cover on an opening to the Provo River Aqueduct Canal wasn't sealed completely shut.
We're taking full responsibility for that.
Thousands upon thousands of gallons of water all came from the system, which runs underground for 21 miles in Utah County. 5 homes were damaged, 2 with significant flooding in the basement.
It's really bad. Yeah, and we had about 1.5 feet of water.
Neighbors came to help with the cleanup, moving furniture, clearing out all that water, and just being there. The homeowners stayed remarkably positive, and it's understandable for those who didn't.
My wife's 9 months pregnant right now, and she didn't do so well with it. It looks like a lot of the stuff can be salvaged, but a lot of stuff's also wet, so we'll just kind of see and play it by ear.
The canal system has been run by a public and private partnership here, which got us wondering if taxpayers would be picking up the bill for their mistake.
We have called an insurance adjuster who will come in and help us evaluate all of this.
We found our answer. The tab, which will be an estimated $50,000, will be paid with private money by the Provo Reservoir Canal Enclosure Project. Homeowners and taxpayers won't have to pay a dime.
It is our job as the association here and operator of this pipeline to make sure that the homeowners are taken care of and made whole by this incident, and we will do that.
So the company's going to take care of the cost. Let's talk about the timeline for the houses that had interior damage, carpets, drywall, things like that. Going to take about 2 weeks to get that all patched up and fixed back to normal. They say for the houses, the 3 houses with exterior damage to landscaping, things on the outside, hopefully less than a week for cleanup time. There, Dave, back to you.
I have to admire the attitudes. You know, it is what it is, and it's a mess, but good folks down there. Thank you, Andrew.
And the point I wanted to make there was that we had this incident, and the association owned the pipeline, and the contractor was our contractor, and it wouldn't have solved anything or done any good if I'd have said on the air, well, we don't know whose fault it is, and we don't know what's going to happen. We'll figure this out. I mean, I figured we're the owner of the project. We're the ones who are ultimately responsible, and it's not going to help anything for us to kind of dodge anything. So I just said, we'll take responsibility. We will figure this out and make them and get those folks taken care of. The claim ended up being $150,000, and it took about a month to get it all resolved. But we didn't have any big horrible problems out of that because we were open and communicating, and that is the message that we want to send today here. So another question, another fundamental maybe is, as you come upon a situation, that is, as you're entering into a new relationship, as a new thing is happening, For example, this COVID-19 thing has come upon all of us and has been a really big problem for all of us. We feel very strongly that this is one of those situations where you can, as a manager of an entity or a subset of an entity or a group of people, you can pretty often be stepping back and trying to keep big perspective and keep people focused on larger perspective. These kinds of things, so even though this one looks different, it's actually the same as many other similar events that have occurred, and its course is going to be very similar. Our reaction is different as a nation, but this thing will actually come and go. And if we can help people remember that this thing will come and go, this is going to go away someday, that we will get back to some kind of new normal. If there's a voice in your organization, in your community, in your family that can keep saying, we're going to be fine, get the big picture, if you will help people with perspective, there'll be a lot fewer of these emotion-based reactions we're seeing from this thing. And that's kind of what I'm speaking about here, is to slow down and to take perspective and to try to keep a focus on the big picture and help these people get through these things and help them understand what this is, because this is, even though it's a big impact on things, we're having our teleconference today because of this. The reality is this thing will come and go. At the end of it, we'll all be a lot better at teleconferencing, hopefully. And I think we're learning a lot today. And we'll get through all these kinds of things, and it will be a great experience. You can look at your own life and see all the things that you're getting kind of better at because you've been required to do that. And these are all good, positive things. So the name of this presentation is Risk Management in the Forefront. And the reality is risk management is not so much in the forefront as it is a saturating kind of a thing. And it becomes saturating in your organization because somebody is the champion, somebody's the advocate for that. That's my next slide. Someone needs to kind of be a leader in that, to be an enthusiast, to be a cheerleader basically for risk management, for safety, for being prudent, being careful, and these kind of things, to help people understand how these things work. Risk management is interesting because, and safety is interesting because if you are doing it right, if you're doing it properly, nothing happens. People come to work, your citizens interact with you, and they all have their interactions, everybody goes to work, and then at the end of the day, they all go home and nothing happens. That's when risk management is really working. And because it's people and because it's things, because we own things and we do things, things do happen and we do have events we need to respond to and things break because it's part of this world. But the reality is our job is to try to get risk management mentality, these kind of principles, this process I'll talk about in just a second, try to get those things into the culture of your organization so that people say, let's say today we're at West Jordan City, and West Jordan City could say, well, we serve the public of West Jordan and the people who visit here. We serve them. That's what we do, but safely is how we do it. And when the organization of West Jordan City and its people start feeling that way, when the people that come here can perceive that is part of the culture here, that's when you know that you're making progress in accomplishing this goal. That is your goal as a person who has risk management responsibilities in your organization, is to try to get that idea, that culture from you to them. So the frontline supervisors are thinking that way, so that the guys operating a backhoe in the street and doing these other kind of things think in those kind of terms. They think in terms of being safe. They have awareness of the people, the citizens of West Jordan that are around them. They're watching these things and have awareness. It takes a long time to accomplish that, but I promise you that that's possible to do that if you will persist and not give up. So finally, there's the risk management process. So we could spend many, many days. People spend whole college careers learning about the risk management process. We could get into that a lot. I'm not going to do a lot of that. I put up a whole bunch of different diagrams of different philosophies behind risk management and what the term means. But what I want you to know, one of the things I've learned from being in this business since 1981 is that risk management works. The process works. If you'll try to keep it simple in your head, not get too complicated, and if you'll follow through on the process, and it's an iterative one, you make iterations and you go through the cycle again and again. But if you'll persist in doing that, you'll find that it works. You'll find that your accident rates go down, that your claims, your third-party claims go down, that even your employment-related claims, all these things will go down as you continue to apply the risk management process and teach it and preach it to the supervisors and management, city councils, governing bodies, whoever you work with. If you'll work to get that into them, and it does take work to do that, you'll find that it starts working. It actually has effects. It actually reduces costs. It actually saves lives. It actually protects property. And that's really kind of the message is those are the situations. So did we end up with any questions? Is our technology advanced enough? We got any questions? So I don't think so. Everybody is still in shock about how well the technology went. And so I just wanted to thank you all. Oop, there we go. Thank you for being with us today. We're so grateful for this, and hope you all COVID well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That was excellent. And our apologies for the technical difficulties. I think we've got everything sorted now. Next presenter will be Bob Carey. Bob, as you probably know, has become a bit of a minor celebrity in the last week. He is the Bureau Chief of the Operations Bureau of the Division of Emergency Management for the state of Utah. And he was very involved and is really the state's authority on earthquake response. So I think we all got a little bit of a wake-up call last week. Fortunately, it wasn't more severe. But Bob is the expert in the state in this area, and we're delighted to have him here with us and to hear his presentation. So with that, we'll welcome Bob Carey.
Okay, good morning. Exciting times. I get questions a little bit about that. My enthusiasm over disasters, and it's we were fortunate with our earthquake for not necessarily having it be a significant event, but more of a reminder of where we live and the potential that we have for having this type of a earthquake and then something bigger down the road. So the talk today is disasters in the making. I find that an interesting topic to talk about, but we're going to talk about it in a sense of planning. And if you felt apprehensive when the earthquake happened, or if you're feeling apprehension from the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a reason there. That's something telling you that there's a lack of preparation. And so you can make yourself better prepared by thinking about this before it happens. This is something that government does on a regular basis. We'll see if we can get it to advance. Up and down? Because the sideways isn't taking it to me. Very good. So where are we going to go with this? So what does an event look like? In our business, it's hazard and risk. You can have a hazard with no risk. How can that be? Well, you just have a hazard out where nobody lives. So that's just one of the things you need to look at. And what are the kinds of things that could affect you? We'll look into that here in a bit. What are your gaps? So when you start evaluating where you're going to go, you may not have everything that you need. That's a gap or a shortfall. You're going to have to count on somebody else helping you. Us in government are big about that because we rely on a lot of partners to kind of do the things that we need to do, especially in a disaster environment. And then how to fight back. And I think that's an important one is what can we do to push back on this? So again, why plan? It comes back to this level of apprehension. If you feel uneasy about having something that you thought you were prepared for, and then your little voice in your head's telling you not, that means that maybe we need to do a little bit more in the planning process. And we'll take a quick look at that here in the time that we have, of the kinds of things that that may help you get to that point of not feeling a little bit better about your predicament. So going to go through a few hazards here, give you an idea of what exposure might look like. I'm going to start with our, this is from the '92 earthquake in St. George. Now, St. George is, the crow flies here about 30 miles away. This is a landslide in Springdale. This landslide destroyed a up-and-coming subdivision. It was blocking the road into Zion Park. It created all kinds of havoc. And so your natural setting, what kinds of things in your natural setting may impact you and your future operations? This hazardous material spill. This is something that we live with every day. This is from the Northridge event. Fortunately, there was no leakage here. But this is in an industrial, residential kind of a setting. So if that's happened, how would you have responded to it? If you couldn't come to work, there's contamination. How does that work? You got to have a plan. You got to have an idea of direction that you want to go. Utility failures. Again, this is from Northridge. That's a water main break that you're seeing. That's a natural gas leak that you're seeing. So some of these happen normally. There's a report put out a couple of years ago about water main breaks in metropolitan areas. And the metropolitan area of Salt Lake County basically ranked kind of in the middle. They were a moderate, and that they were having roughly 300 water main breaks a year. That's in static soil. So when an earthquake happens, then what else are you going to see? How much more water main breaks are you going to get in the immediacy of that event? And how does that affect your operation? So again, evaluating what you're having to deal with. This particular graphic I really like, because this graphic basically gives you an idea of water retention in the greater Salt Lake area. And when we talk about high hazard dams, that doesn't mean that they're vulnerable. It means that there's population below them. That would be the height that has this as a hazard. And so a lot of these you would not even think about, or you don't see them. There could be a water storage facility, could be a water tank. But the point being is that there's water being retained, being inhibited. And so you need to have an understanding of how that may affect your facility. And it doesn't take an earthquake to do that. We have blue sky failures from time to time on smaller retentions. Now, we've not really had anything on larger dams. A lot of the dams, state dams, are water storage for irrigation. So again, looking at possibilities. That's the idea behind doing this hazard assessment. Wildfire. This is an increasingly big deal depending on where you're at. Picture here is from a immigration fire back in the 80s. A lot more construction there. You look at Park City and its setting. It's prime for wildfire, and especially in Park City where you have a lot of wooden structures. It could be a big deal. I'll show you this picture. This picture is from one of the California fires. This is Santa Rosa. I can guarantee you that these people never once thought that this would ever happen to them. The idea behind fire breaks, you had a major freeway that was supposed to be the fire break, and that didn't happen. The construction here, of course, is all wood and tightly packed. You end up something like this in the big city. People don't feel that this is a possibility. Quite frankly, when I first saw this picture, I was stunned to see this, because you don't equate this in your thinking. You don't equate this happening in the big city. You've got fire protection. A house catches on fire. That's about the only thing that burns, and And now we're seeing that in a little different light. So let's talk a little bit about our earthquake. And I'm going to kind of put a little finer point to this. So what you're seeing here is a shake map. And this shake map is a product from the USGS and the seismograph stations up at the University of Utah. And it's basically showing you the level of intensity. And one of the things that I've caught my eye on this is that we at the point of where the earthquake started, where the big star is on this diagram, that's an intensity 7. And if you look at that, that talks about very strong ground shaking. So what we know about how our environment, our built environment, is going to perform with that type of a ground motion, we're going to have damage. Now, are we going to have collapse? Probably not. Haven't seen really anything like that to date. But that's strong ground shaking, and that's something that I think that was a little unexpected to be quite that high for me. Nonetheless, I think that we're kind of playing this by the book. This is the fault behavior here is what we thought it would be, and I think that as we do the damage assessment, it's going to probably come in kind of close to where we thought. So what does that damage look like? Well, non-structural on the left, that kind of stuff, things that weren't secured down, ceiling tiles coming out. On the right, you can see a partial collapse of a wall. I can guarantee you this, the people that own that place probably doesn't have earthquake insurance because A, it's going to be way too expensive because they're in an unreinforced masonry building, and their whole livelihood may have been tied up into this. This type of damage is exactly what we thought we would see. Appendages, so parapet damage is quite prevalent. Chimney damage, partial wall failure. That's the kinds of things that we're seeing right now. And what was in place, not only on the financial side, but for the people that have to work there. You can do things to put yourself in a better position to respond to this event beforehand by just doing some steps to get yourself there. Okay, step up our game a little bit here. We're looking at what we scenarioize as the big one. You can see how much bigger the disaster area has been created with this. This is a planning tool, and that's one of the things when you're starting to get into looking at your hazards is create a kind of a scenario of what you think is going to happen, and then work to see how you can mitigate that stuff after the fact. That's kind of what we do at the state. We look at the problem and then what are we going to need to attack it? And we're going to look at that here in a little more detail. But to put a face to this is now you can see damage. This is the damage from Christchurch. You can see now that the damage is going to be much more significant from that. Again, older buildings are going to be more affected by this. But you know, the next picture here is about non-structural damage, and that's going to be a big player. This is where you see the ceiling systems coming out. It makes, even though this structure could well have been not damaged in the event, you could still use the building. It didn't have any structural problems. Now you can see where you've lost the use of the building based on these non-structural elements of the building. And that's a lot of what we see in the event. And then on the hospitalization side, most of your injuries come from non-structural. They don't come from building collapse. They come from this. And this is something that you can easily take care of in the future. And again, just a little different shot where you've lost the ceiling system, and then some of the bookcases and things like this. You know, duct cover and holds a big deal here when we're dealing with earthquakes to protect yourself. Structural collapse is rare. You see it a lot. That's because it's news, but building types, it doesn't. You don't see it as much. So one of the places that you can go to get information about hazards is with the hazard mitigation plan. I show you the cover from our state hazard mitigation plan, and in that plan, you will find some discussion on hazards. The county has a plan of their own, and some communities do. So it would be useful to get acquainted with your emergency manager, both at the city and the county level, when taking on creating a hazard mitigation plan. And as we talk about here in a bit, a continuity of operations plan. So within that plan, in our plan, this is the list of things that we look at. They're all on the natural side. We can toss in, as I showed earlier, the hazardous material. It's more technological. There'll be cyber is another area in which there could and would be issues. But this is our starting list of what we would be looking at and creating ways in which we would respond to those, both as a response and then as how it may affect our operations at the state. So kind of close out this a little bit, I wanted to show a couple of pictures here. This is from the 2005 flooding. This flooding was, first of all, the setting that you see here is how did these people build houses so close to the river? Well, the river before this started was a couple of 100 feet away. They were in kind of an area in which over the years had filled in and naturally, and when this big set of storms came through, the material down there is easily moved, and the river basically expanded to its original bank width, and this is what you end up with. So it's important when you start to look at these hazards and see and try to get an idea of exactly what you would expect them to do. I would say this was a bit of a surprise. I don't think people really felt that was ever going to happen. Obviously, they built here, so the community felt the same way. But that's part of the challenge, is trying to get ahead of what Mother Nature is trying to do to us as we ever increasingly encroach in areas where it's not as suitable for construction as it may have been before. So with the earthquake, this is what I kind of find is a little subtlety here. Yeah, we live in the valley and we can have really big earthquakes, and that's how you look at it. But there's more to it than that. There's where's the fault? Is there liquefaction potential? We toss on the landslides, the rock falls. Those are all elements that would come from an earthquake. The picture I'm showing you here has got a nice little subtle line that you see running through the middle of the picture. This is basically the Wasatch Fault running from the south side, basically the Cottonwood Mall, over to 3300 South, basically along Highland Drive. Offset on our fault during the earthquake is going to be 6 to 10 feet. So you're basically not going to get to cross that line in the near future from that event. So how is your business set up to function if you can't have movement? And this is, like I say, a subtlety here that another thing you have to take into consideration when you're doing that evaluation. So let's take a look at a little bit of the numbers of the scenario that we've created, because I want to show you how we go about looking at shortfalls. So again, this is a 7.0 on the Salt Lake segment. Just to give you an idea how big this is versus the earthquake we just had, in that this is a 7, this is probably about 10, 15 times bigger. Well, it's about 15 times bigger than the earthquake we just went through. To put it in perspective, that basically affects the northern 12 counties, roughly 2.7 million people, which represents about 87% of the state's population. So it's a big deal. How do we go about handling the response to this event? This is how we first characterize it. That's what we were talking about earlier, is characterize your hazard, and then you can start to make an approach to it. So the diagram that you're looking at now is a diagram that has been created in conjunction with a planning effort between the state of Utah and FEMA Region 8 out of Denver, Colorado. Basically, it's an update to our 2012 scenario, and the numbers that you're going to see on the side, the little green arrows means how much has jumped from the 2012 data. But the point being is we're not too much worried about how much has jumped. What are the numbers in themselves? So as you can see, 11,000 hospitalization injuries. So let's take that in context of what's happening to us in the moment. If our earthquake had not been the 5.7, it had been the big one, we see a surge here of 11,000 people that are going to have to go to the hospital. And the fact that we also have a pandemic going where we're going to have a surge of people going to the hospital. So hospitals become a big deal. And this is a shortfall. We can't take care of that. So how do we go about taking care of that? That's a gap. So what we'll end up doing if we didn't have the pandemic and we just had the earthquake, we would be working with who could provide us with that type of requirement. This is where we would be reaching out to the federal government, probably doing some, we have portable surgical tents that we have strategically placed in locations around the country. We could bring those to bear. We could do requests to the surrounding communities, states, because they're not going to be part of this earthquake. So there's ways of attacking that. As you move down on this list, you'll see displaced population. So 89,000 displaced households. That's roughly 1.6 or 3.6 people per household. So pretty much 20% of the Salt Lake Valley is affected by this. And then you take the next step down and it's about 54,000 people to shelters. We have 8,000 cots in the state of Utah. So that's kind of a gap there. Where are you going to do this? Where are you going to put these people? Are you going to create a mega shelter and do it in the Salt Palace or a big convention center or an empty shopping center? Those things you can plan out, those things that you can look at and have in a way in which you have looked at this and say, well, now we know the places that we need to look. What's available now at this point in time? The other big keys here are near the bottom. They're utility-based. It's interesting to have Jordan or Provo Water users here because water is the biggest deal. If we look at what utility is going to be the biggest deal to us, it's water. Even if your building survives, if you have water, wastewater to it, you can't use it. So that becomes a big deal. As you look at it, it doesn't come back very readily. So in your thinking here in the Valley, you have this event, you got to think that it could be long-term before you get back into your facility for that particular reason. Okay, so how do we fight back? And I think the best way to fight back is having a COOP plan, continuity of operations plan. And this particular plan basically enables you to have looked at what needs to be done and then how are you going about taking care of it. So what you're looking at here on the screen is what we do. This is part of our COOP plan. And yours is going to look a little bit different because you're not a state and we are, and we respond a little bit differently. I'll give you an example. There was a business out on the west side, and they closed up shop on a Friday night. And sometime after they closed up shop, they had a water main break in the building. When they came into work on Monday, the building's full of water. They had a key to get in, but nobody knew how to get into the location where to turn off the water. So several phone calls later, they finally got that figured out. They shouldn't have had to do that. This should be something that's kind of an automatic. So with us, what does your response look like? How did they communicate with their employees that they can't come to work now? What system was set up there? And I think really the biggest issue with dealing with COOP planning is that chain of command. If somebody can't be there, who's the next one to step up? And I think that's really critical for people to understand that. It makes for a much smoother response if we have our roles and responsibilities in place to be able then to just move from one individual to another. It's really important with us at the state because in a big event, the person that's representing the state coordinating officer, could well be tied up in meetings all the time. And there were things that he would have normally been doing or she would have normally been doing and the EOC that now has to be delegated to somebody else. And we know how that's going to work. We know who those people are, who can be signing for things like that. So again, this particular item I think is useful for anybody. All state agencies have a continuity of operations plan. For existence, you can't get in your building because it doesn't have water, it doesn't have power. What would that look like? Had you researched that out to find another location? So that's what this plan is going to help you with. And at the bottom of this list, I tossed this one on myself. It's supply chain, because we're seeing the supply chain in a big way right now with the pandemic. But supply chain's a big deal. And I can point out a couple of reasons why I say that. So let's talk about fuel in the metro area here. So we have the oil refineries. If those oil refineries go down, this is how that impacts the state. Every gas station in the state gets fuel from basically Salt Lake City. They don't get it from any place else. They get it from the refineries in Salt Lake City. Jet fuel to the airport comes from those refineries. Jet fuel to Boise International comes from those. So major supply chain break here. So now we're going to have to reach out to other locations for fuel. So closest one's Sinclair in Wyoming. And then you start to look at the Northwest and the West Coast and Denver to bring fuel into the valley. And that's a major deal. Supply chain as where do you get product from? If you get product from the Southeast, then you know that gets interrupted pretty much once or every other year at the bare minimum when a hurricane comes through. So having alternate ways of doing your supplying yourself is a really big deal. This is one of the things that we're chasing very heavily at the state, of having a better understanding of that flow. Another example, truck traffic that brings almost all of our commodities these days. 240 trucks come through the Echo port of entry every hour. So if we cut off I-80, which we would have happen in our big earthquake, how does that affect us? And then how does that affect the nation? It's a much bigger problem. And these are things currently that we're looking at, the bigger picture things, because you just can't divert traffic off onto another highway and think that you've solved the problem. It's a little bit bigger than that. So to close this out a little bit, presented a lot of problems here. What can we do about it? So I've given you some resources here. The first one is a website that our hazard mitigation section created that goes into looking at hazards. And in the state hazard mitigation plan, it also brings up solutions of problems that we see out there, how we think we can approach to mitigate those. So it's a great resource. It also has the ability to point out hazards that you may have in and around your location. So it's very handy. The next one is the State Geological Survey. So if you wanted to get in and look at hazards there in particular in a little more detail, that works out really well. The next one's out of our office at the State Emergency Management Office. It's our Be Ready Utah unit. It has Be Ready Business in it. It has Be Ready Schools in it. Very good resource for preparedness as well as the planning side. The Quake Utah EDU, that's the seismograph station. So if you wanted to look at recent earthquake activity, especially here in the state, you can find that at that location. The Utah Seismic Safety Commission website's got a lot of documents in it that are useful one document is our home guide for unreinforced masonry homes and to retrofit those. That's a really good document. Our Putting Down Roots document is a general overall knowledgeable document about the earthquake hazard, structural issues, and preparedness stuff in it also. And then the last ones are the website at the state. In particular, I wanted to show that we do an awful lot of training throughout the year. That if you wanted to catch some training into planning, into incident command, those types of things, that's a great place to go. So with that, I've said this before, earthquakes aren't always so bad. This is recreational opportunities for your kids. I find this one timely now, as now that we've had felt earthquake activity in the state. This is the result of ground shaking from an earthquake that's roughly 10 times bigger than the one that we just had. And you can see that this is just energy that has come through this neighborhood. I call it slinky energy. It's where you have compression and extension. And that's one of the surface waves that you get. So this is why you see water main breaks and things like that. Those would be the extension part. So not only does that affect the infrastructure, it affects buildings, but this is just a great example of what that might look like. And I always thought that since I said it was a recreational opportunity, that I find one of those, and I actually do that. This is from the Napa Valley earthquake in 2014. Now, Napa's at the extreme edge of this earthquake, and yet we still see failure and buckling in the street. But as you look at that picture, you also see that the concrete and the driveway and along the sidewalk, less the gutter, has performed fairly well. So we know how to do this. We know how to build things to mitigate that. But it's just having that understanding of where you're at, the building you're in, the environment that you're in, looking at all of that and deciding what are the things that could impact that, and then start planning on how you would go out around that. And with that, I'm going to call it a day.
Several questions did come in, Bob, if you have just another minute.
Sure.
Is this being picked up? The first question came in regards to how do you plan for the social media? In the most recent earthquake, there was a lot of false information that had been conveyed by means of social media, and it just seemed to kind of spawn and breed on its own. And how do you address?
Okay, so the social media thing, that is kind of an interesting thing. When we did our webcast up at the seismograph stations, of which I will point out, if we had the big one, we would not have held that because we would have been busy. That was the first thing that we approached. So you're going to get this. So at our shop, we went to task on it as quickly as we could to try to knock that down. This is something, I will tell you this, only believe what you hear or read on social media when it comes from an authoritative source, like the city of West Jordan, or the state of Utah, or the seismograph stations, or the Geologic Survey. If you're seeing something from something other than that, then you need to fact check. Because first of all, the faults in the state can't generate earthquakes over about a 7.5. So a 9 was completely impossible to do. So that would be one thing. There was also rumors about the refineries being on fire. My first thought was, did you see smoke? Look to authoritative social media to get your answers. Don't get it from everybody that's trending or doing this or other thing. That's a big mistake.
Very good. Second question came in on how do you coordinate all of the communication amongst all the emergency responders if things like cell towers go down? Okay, so as far as communication, disasters are run from the bottom up. So cities are in the lead. They may not feel that way, but they are. The cities are the driving force because they're the closest to the problem. From there, what they'll do is they'll reach up to the county and then the county to the state. So as communications go, there's a system in place for emergency communications that has enough redundancy in it that there should be the ability to communicate at some level between all of the jurisdictions. We run on 800 megahertz, and then within 800 megahertz, each entity has space. That's going to be changing in the near future to be more robust. There's been some issues with 800 megahertz because of changes that we've had to make with the
destruction of the state office building. A lot of communication goes through that particular building. But yeah, there's going to be some disruption, but it's not connected to the cell towers. That's a separate communication medium than what the first responders use. So it's 800 megahertz that they're on, and that should be really busy.
Last question is, could you spend a little more time talking about chain of command? You mentioned it.
Okay, so all this is a means by which if somebody doesn't show up, or if for whatever reason the person that's the lead person, whether it's the mayor, the CEO, if they can't come in, you have organized a list of where that falls next. I'll give you an example. In our office, at the top of the list is our director, and then the next person down is the deputy director. And if neither one of them are available, then it drops down to the next person, which will be me, because I'm over operations. It falls then to one of the other two bureau chiefs. And so that's how that works. But in our COOP plan, we've actually devised it to what happens if none of us showed up. So this is something that you can do is sit down and organizationally talk through how you want to see that delegation of authority when it falls past that. So when it falls past that, it drops down to section managers, and that first one would be our operations section manager, which would make sense because that's where most of your activity is going to be anyway, is in an operational point of view, at least in our office. So you just have to look at that in that kind of mentality of and who. It could be person driven too. So when you change personnel, you may change the order in which you would want to do that. But that's how you do it. You look at that, and it's you kind of want people that are good at decision making, that are not afraid to problem solve, because really that's all we do. It's not a tough job. It's just having a problem, and then we got to take care of it, and you take care of it. It's pretty basic from my point of view of dealing with disasters. Is just when you're asked, didn't get it figured out. I've seen people that have not ever had any training that were put in a position that they had to do this, and they did. It took them a lot longer to do, but they got it done. So if you're a good problem solver, you'll work great in an emergency management operational sense. So.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Questions.
Thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate those remarks. Our next presenter, pardon me while I multitask just a moment. Our next presenter is Rick Gardner. Rick serves as the Region 8 Cybersecurity Advisor for CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. He supports the Department of Homeland Security mission of strengthening the security and resilience of the nation's critical infrastructure. His daily responsibilities include cyber preparedness, information sharing and collaboration, risk mitigation and incident response, and providing cybersecurity resources, including providing cybersecurity assessments. Rick has over 22 years working as a professional in information technology, including his previous assignment with the Utah Army National Guard. He served in the military for the last 25 years and is currently serving as a CW4 Senior Team Chief for the Utah Army National Guard Defense Cyber Operations Element. In this capacity, he's responsible for planning, supervising, coordinating, and providing technical assistance for defensive cyberspace operations. He has numerous IT and cyber certifications and has a Master of Science from National Defense University and a Bachelor of Science from Bellevue University. And with that, we will welcome Mr. Rick Gardner.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So sorry about that. Appreciate the opportunity. I'd like to thank Daryl for letting me have this opportunity to present to you. This brief is really put together to provide for you the resources that are available from a cybersecurity foxhole of what's available. So there are a lot of resources. Everything that I'm going to brief out today is no cost. And so without too much further to say, I think most of my introduction was covered. And so again, I'll just sort of reiterate, but as a cybersecurity advisor, I'm assigned here in Utah. I live here locally. I also cover Montana and Wyoming. And we also have, and I'll introduce his slides later in my deck, but we have a PSA, or a protective security advisor, and his name is Mark Lemery. And I'll introduce, I'll give you his contact information and tell you a little bit more of what he provides, also at no cost. So to kick this off, again, I'm with CISA. So Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, a fairly newer agency, although we've been doing our job for the last 6-7 years under Homeland Security. And again, we lead the nation's effort to understand and manage risk, specifically to critical infrastructure. So I work with public sector, private sector, and government partners. Our job is to share information, build trust, and lead the nation's efforts to protect and enhance resiliency of nation's physical and cyber infrastructure. There are 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So everything that I'm going to talk about is at no cost and available to the owners, operators, those who are working within critical infrastructure. So health, finance, transportation, elections, water. There's a lot. City, local government, county networks, those networks that we rely on for lifeline sectors, for critical services. And so please work with me, give me a call. If you're questioning or wondering if you're part of the 16 critical, I can help you to determine that. So as a cybersecurity advisor, our program is set up, and I'll kind of go into more detail a little later, but I have a lot of assessments in ways that I can help you to understand and to identify risk in your systems. Just because your system potentially does not connect to the network doesn't mean that there's not risk to it. And I will help you to, from a NIST cybersecurity framework perspective, understand full scope opportunities for improvement, right? I promote, build, educate, listen, and coordinate. That's what our program does. And we're eager to do that. Throughout the 54 right now, there's currently 27 cybersecurity advisors that are currently on staff with an authorization to hire 25 more. And so that's being done now. So the intent is to have a CSA in all 54 states, and in the big states, multiple CSAs, or cybersecurity advisors. So for Utah, I have an alternate who resides in Colorado. And so Dave Sondheim is my alternate, but for all Utah, it is me as your primary, and I'll give my contact information at the very end of my presentation. So with our program, we're obviously working with a lot of very sensitive system owners that need to be protected, right? As far as when I come in and provide an assessment, I'm helping you to identify risk. Those reports that we provide back to you are protected under PCII. So protected critical infrastructure information. And so what that does is it makes those reports so they can't be called up on a GRAMA FOIA request. They can't be used against you in civil litigation. I truly am a trusted, individual that can really help in identifying opportunities for improvement and risk in your systems. And those reports, again, they're just going to the person identified in the PCII agreement. And so typically that's a CIO, it's a CISO, it's an IT manager, it's for industrial control systems, it's a plant operations guy, risk manager. whoever it is that is most, that kind of works with me, that needs to get those reports so that they can action them and build resilience, that's the individual that gets those reports. And the organizations will identify who those individuals are on the PCII form that I get before I go in and work with the entity. So that's how PCII works. There's no attribution back to include even me working with other stakeholders throughout the state and other states. I'm not reporting who I work with, what's been discovered. It's treated very sensitive. So I've kind of put this together so that I'm going to quickly go through a catalog of all available cybersecurity resources. Kind of with the intent is just for you to hear and understand, yep, there's a lot of things. I'll give you a little bit detail and things that I feel are most important, but I'm going to compact this into about 30 minutes so that you have just an idea. And so if I say something that you're interested in and you want to follow up information, more details regarding what these offerings are, that's where please contact me. I have forms I can send you. We can have a discussion and go from there. So the way we work is I have a whole range of assessments. And so I typically start with what's called a cyber resilience review. It's a CRR. It's a high-level C-suite strategic assessment where I'm understanding and talking you through your processes, your procedures, your policies, what you have in place that's documented. I'll talk more about that, but as I go down, I work through external dependencies. I have a lot of other tools, and again, I'll kind of go into each of these, but just so you know, I get to a technical level, but I start at a high level. And so we have many different types of assessments that you can use to identify risk in your systems. So to kick off, I'm going to talk about the CRR, the Cyber Resilience Review. So what this is me coming on site. It takes about 6 hours, and I work you through understanding from a NIST cybersecurity framework to include a CERT RMM or risk management model, how resilient you are, how mature you are throughout the 10 domains in the CSF. So starting with asset management, we go through and ask a series of about 400 questions, ending with situational awareness. And I ask about people, facilities, technology, and information. All those things really make up your cybersecurity posture. They house the technology themselves. It's how well you know what you have, how you're managing what you have, if you're doing it according to any predefined plan or overarching compliance requirement, and then adding in all the layers of resilience. It's a very eye-opening assessment. I feel that it's very useful. Typically in a CRR, there's about 6 participants in your organization, starting with the technology folks, right? Those that are managing the devices, to include a risk manager, to include, for instance, we talk about emergency operations or continuity plans, which we just, you heard a lot about, incident response plans. If you have those in place for the capabilities or the systems that are providing for critical infrastructure. At the end of the, so the report on the CRR is about 120 pages. And what it does is it highlights and shows you from green, amber, red, where you have risk, where you, for instance, don't have a capability. You don't have a security sort of best business practice applied. It scores you out in a maturity indicator level score from 0 to 5. So 0 being incomplete, 5 being it's very defined, it's measured, it's managed, it's planned, it's performed. That's how this report works. And so quite honestly, how this kind of can be used is to guide resources, to guide planning so that you are operating as most efficiently as you can and in areas of where you have potentially the most risk in your system. So this is just a sampling on this slide of what one of those pages looks like. So from a red area, hey, this is where you have the most risk, to, areas of where you have a lot of green, or you have a capability, you already have controls, you have maturity, you've spent a lot of time and effort in that area. Again, 120 pages, it's very useful. I highly recommend the CRR, and it is, to me, a starting place of what do you have, where are you, so you can then further maturing your system. And that's where I'm going to take you to the next assessment. It's an external dependency management assessment. Once you know what you have, we're going to ask you about, does that apply to those same levels of controls, maturity, apply to your supply chain? Those that you rely on, your external dependencies, your third parties that you form contracts with. This one is, again, it's a facilitated assessment that I come on site, and this only takes about 3 hours. And we talk you through, how do you form the relationship with a third party entity, to how are you managing it? How are you governing it? Is there contract language, that goes beyond boilerplate contract language to include cyber resilience? And we give you a lot of, honestly, it's recommendations for your consideration. And I, again, find this one to be just very valuable. We talk a lot about the protection and sustainment of your contracts with third-party entities. Or I say contracts, but also agreements, MOUs, MOAs, entities that you're relying on to provide your service. To the next, we offer a cyber infrastructure survey. Again, I facilitate this, I come on site. This one takes about 4 hours. And what I do, again, is this maps back to the NIST CSF, cybersecurity framework. We covered the same 10 domains. But at the end of this one, you're putting everything into an online portal. You're literally managing your IT portfolio and doing it from a risk perspective. Where in these domains do you have a capability, and how mature is that capability? And what are the domains where you don't have controls? You don't have a response, for instance, to a capability to recover from a ransomware event. So within this tool, we put it all in. It's in a dashboard that then you get. You have your own password to get back into, and you manage your dashboard. So we take you from an as is, and this is the tool we give you to continue as you build a capability. As you add resilience to your system, you track it in this online portfolio. You also can run threat scenarios against your posture. For instance, if you don't have, we talked about a COOP site, you're going to really not do well when you run a threat of a natural disaster against yourself, because you're going to find that, well, when you lose your primary, let's say, data center, or your primary, building, if you don't have a COOP site, it's not operational, you can't recover from a natural disaster, your threat is high in that area. So pretty neat that you can throw those threat scenarios against yourself. A thing that I also really like is that it shows, so a manager can run and show improvements that they've made, or an operations manager, a plant manager, a CIO, a CISO. As you're maturing your processes, you're taking effort, you can capture those in this tool. You can run an annual report and see how well you've improved your posture. You can see all the improvements that you've made. The other thing that's neat is comparisons. You can see how well you compare against others in your same sector. I really like that too, because, for instance, a water system owner, operator, they want to know, look, they don't want to be compared to, a nuclear plant, right? A federal, military installation. They want to know, how do I compare against other water utilities? This lets us see how well you actually are comparing. So obviously risk is somewhat of a balanced approach. It's always understanding it and then coming up with mitigation steps, and then to a point where you're accepting it. And obviously there at some point needs to be an acceptable level of risk. And as we talk a lot about, it's really hard to completely get rid of risk all the way. Just another example of how that looks with the comparison. So again, I'm just one person here in Utah, but what I am is the tip of the spear. I'm representing an agency that's very big, that's being funded to develop a lot of capabilities for you. And so I'm going to talk about the NCIC, and we're kind of going through, you know, an organization name change. They call this now the SIOC, but this is a integration center where they work a lot of effort. They're back in DC. And so what I'm about to give to you as further resources are being deployed from there. They're teams that are working remotely. They're doing scanning, they're doing pen testing, they're doing phishing campaigns, and it's a lot of people with, you know, using a lot of federal dollars to develop these tools that can be, you can leverage to help to defend your systems, to understand where you're at, to test, to validate. And so just know that that's an entity that we have within our agency, and they're very professional, really smart cyber defender types. So we have a team also that will help to coordinate exercises. If you find that you've developed an incident response plan, a contingency operations plan, you want to test it, let us help and be involved. If you feel like you want to work with other entities, you want to test your external dependencies, bring in, for instance, your ISP, others that are involved in your COOP plan, we can test that with you in an exercise, a tabletop type exercise. We work with the stakeholder to understand their objectives, and then we help to create the injects that are going to, you know, deliver a really good exercise. So we have a whole team that can do that. We have a malware analysis team. So they work, if you get something on your network you just don't understand, you know, hey, this kind of looks like it's iffy, this is potentially malware, maybe it's ransomware, you don't know what to do with it, you're not sure what it is, let us help you to analyze it. So there's a place to upload the files to, and an address. This slide is meant to give you an idea of, look, this is a lot of stuff that it's another branch, again, up at the NCIC, we call them NCATs, or the cybersecurity division now, but this is a lot of stuff that we can do, and the way that we work is pretty strategically. So there's things that I offer that are going to take a whole year. There's things I offer that are 6 months, 3 months, 2 months. A lot of my services are between 30 and 90 days. But bottom line, everything kind of has a schedule. You submit in your level of interest, what you're after, you work with me, and then we get everything set up. And that's kind of the point of that slide. I do cyber hygiene scan. We do scans. So we actually use a tool called Nessus, and we do vulnerability scanning on your network. So you give us your public-facing IP addresses, and we give you back weekly reports that detail, here's the criticals, highs, medium, lows in your environment. This is what we're seeing. It's looking specifically at your operating system and looking at vulnerabilities in those systems. Again, just free reports. Phishing campaigns. These are great. These go 6 weeks. This is a great way of providing training and awareness to your users. You know, what ransomware potentially looks like when it comes through the network, what a phishing, you know, email looks like. This next slide kind of details it's 6 weeks long. You get click rates, you get reports. This is a great, you know, no cost service that should be utilized as a way of training and to keep your users aware of, you know, phishing. This is another really great one. So again, you know, I'm about halfway through as far as the C-suite. I'm down to, we know what you have, and now we're starting to look at the validation of what you have. And this is where we offer what's called a VADR. We validate your architecture design review. Validate architecture design review. This is a team that looks at your network topology. Each of your systems that are in place, that defense in depth, that are providing a service, we look at them. We look for misconfigurations. They do traffic analysis. They're helping to understand Do you have, for instance, a port, a service turned on that shouldn't be? We give back recommendations based off of our analysis. Just another slide to kind of emphasize what happens during that. We also look at logs, and we validate your architecture. We also then start into testing. So now that we know what you have, we've done some validation. Now let's test this stuff. So we start with a remote pen test. So again, very skilled technicians that are working to exploit vulnerabilities that you have and to help then you understand devices that are misconfigured and ways that we've been able to get into your network. And it starts again just remotely. So this is just a team. You're only out about three or so months, 4 months, you know, depending on the type of critical infrastructure you are. And we can do a lot of these. So this is something, if you ask for it, you're going to probably get. And it's a great place to validate your networks. From there, we go into a little more kind of an advanced persistent threat. This is a red team assessment. They're working much harder and for a longer period of time to actually exploit your systems. Look, you know, find those vulnerabilities and get into your networks. We're going to validate how well you've segmented your networks. Can we, for instance, get into your industrial control systems? Can we get in from your industrial control systems to the IT network? We go back and forth. It's interesting how they're able to do that. And again, then we'll show you how we did it and recommend how to mitigate or harden those devices so that we can't do that. So this again is more of a 6-month wait time, but you know, as we're working through other assessments, it'll sort of just come naturally in the flow as you're maybe taking a year going through our resources. We have a hunt incident response team. So understand that this team, there's I believe 4 of them at this point. They're constantly deployed. They're constantly throughout the 54 and in response to incidents in critical infrastructure. So your incident response plan, you should include Homeland Security. They have and they'll work with you remotely. They'll give you recommendations. They have technical guides that they can send us to immediately help you, for instance, to get through a ransomware attack. However, they're not always available to come out on site. So I'm trying to really be an honest steward, manage your expectations here that we have a capability, but you're competing with 16 other sectors and very big entities where these teams likely are deployed. So they're not always available. So I'm letting you know that. Everything we do takes scheduling time. So understand that, usually 90 to 120 days, but back to the scheduling slide I showed you, some of them even up to a year, and other things even quicker. So I put this in here because it's very important. So for maintaining situational awareness, I've put out, look, there's an ISAC for every critical sector. And so here's just an example, but I put the IT ISAC, water ISAC, elections infrastructure ISAC, financial services. To maintain situational awareness, I highly recommend subscribing to and receiving information through an ISAC. You're going to receive a lot of information. Again, if throughout the 54 there's an activity, one of the great ways of sharing that with the same system owners throughout the nation is to use an ISAC. And so by getting that information, you can, you know, do some analysis to see, hey, does this apply to me? And do I need to mitigate to harden my system so this doesn't happen to me? So a great way of keeping situational awareness. And I put on its own slide the MS ISAC because this is the one that's really, it's very popular. It kind of covers, it's a lot. These guys are very active and they do a lot more than just send out emails. They have a lot of capabilities that they can provide to include incident response. So I kind of highlight or foot stomp that MS ISAC is just, you gotta belong to this as far as an option for your consideration. I don't make recommendations. I say options for consideration. So that's, please consider MS ISAC. So again, I mentioned I have a counterpart that's called a Protective Security Advisor, or a PSA. And again, one per state. So Mark Lowry is here in Utah, and there's one in every single state. And they do a lot to look at physical controls, gates, guards, locks, cameras. They help you to ensure that your physical security is up to par, right? So he has a lot of different tools and assessments he can provide. That's what's on this slide. So for more information about any type of assessment he does, and he's got some very sort of advanced tools that he uses. For instance, the Infrastructure Visual Platform, or IVP. That's really neat. I mean, it's a digital floor plan. If you're wondering how you're going to deal with a active shooter, for instance, in your environment, this is something that you can work with. Having this, law enforcement's going to really understand and more effectively navigate your building to work through that situation. That's Mark's information. I'll pause here for 2 seconds. And then the next slide is just simply my contact information. And I welcome any questions. If you're interested at all in any of the assessments, again, all at no cost, please give me an email or a phone call. I'd be happy to further describe, give you flyers, go into any detail you want on what it is that I do and how I can be of service. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to be here with you.
A couple of questions came in. One is, do you have any recommendations? Quite a few people are working at home that have previously been in more of an office-based environment, and now is that creating more vulnerabilities? And if so, what are some of the tips that they can follow for cyber hygiene to assure they're not going to get additional risk from all this working at home?
That's a really good question. And we actually we just sent out all of the things that we are recommending and things for your consideration that people can do from home to ensure that they're connecting securely. So we have a lot of information to share. Ideally, it's best to get that information from your own IT managers, because they understand the solutions that they have, and they can recommend the protocol for securely using the network, resources that they're connecting back and using. But bottom line is users just need to be aware that they need to operate on trusted networks. They need to be aware that they should not be, for instance, sharing information across networks. So for instance, if you have a corporate email account, passing things to a Gmail account, that's probably not smart. Keep it on the corporate network. A VPN solution is really the recommended solution. But that's where, again, going back to, your system owners, managers, your security staff, and following their protocols, because they'll tell you how they want you to connect, where the safe place is to upload data, to get data from. Some companies have very mature, ways of doing things remotely. And so there is VPNs, there is trusted networks that they know they can connect to. But bottom line is simply to know that you're in an environment that's really not trusted. It's your home, right? It's not your workplace. And so those networks and all those layers of defense that they do to keep your data very safe and your operating environment secure, you're working in a remote location. So ideally connecting back in through a VPN, you're now under that protection. And so that's important. If you're operating, offline, that to me is one that, look, you're better off to connect to that VPN solution so that you're working under those layers of defense. But if that's the capability that you don't have, then just simply, it's operating with awareness. There's so many with COVID-19, honestly, there's phishing campaigns going on all over, trying to get us to click on links to face masks, to, hand sanitizers, to just information that they're sharing, but it's in the form of phishing. It's malware if you click on that. And it's just operating with awareness and knowing that you're in an untrusted environment. And so treat it that way, unless you have a capability to get back to a secure network. And so I don't know if that's kind of helped a little bit, but those are the things that come to my mind.
Very good. Well, thank you very much,
Yes, sir.
Rick. We appreciate your presentation. And once again, Rick's information is embedded in his slides, which will be available after the risk conference. And so you can look up the slides. He has a lot of resources available, and we would recommend that everyone fully utilize those resources. One other thing we wanted to mention is that we have the planning complete for our fall risk conference, which will be on September 15th at Gardner Village here in West Jordan once again. And a few of the speakers who were not able to participate in this webcast agreed to be carried over to the fall risk conference. We're very excited about that. And we appreciate everyone tuning in and staying with this broadcast. We have our initial numbers, and it sounds like very well received, and we very much appreciate people being involved in this webcast. It is a little bit different methodology. Obviously, we love to interact and to be with you as our clients and friends. But the most important thing is all of us need to continue to be safe and to do our part to make sure that we don't have further spread of these viruses. And with that, we'll go ahead and sign off. And once again, appreciate everyone being part of this broadcast.